My family called me a failure at reunion. They didn't know I secretly bought their company. The clinking of silverware against fine china, the drone of polite conversation, the forced laughter that always felt like a prelude to thinly veiled insults. It was all so familiar. Another annual family reunion. Another grand display of the illusion of familial bliss. Silas sat at the expansive dining table, a quiet observer amidst the cacophony, a ghost at his own feast of humiliation. The setting itself, a grand dining hall in his Uncle Robert's sprawling estate, seemed to amplify the family's self-importance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished mahogany, reflecting the gleaming silver and the satisfied, often condescending, faces of his relatives. Every detail, from the starched linen napkins to the perfectly arranged floral centerpieces, spoke of a meticulously maintained facade of prosperity and tradition. His cousin, Preston, leaned back in his ornate, high-backed chair, a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his perfectly coiffed face. A diamond-studded watch glinted under the chandelier, catching the light as he gestured expansively, holding court as he always did. Preston was the undeniable center of the family's adulation, their golden boy, embodying everything they valued: tangible success, conventional ambition, and an effortless charm that masked a cutting arrogance. His voice, a booming baritone cultivated through years of boardroom presentations and public speaking, cut through the room, directed pointedly, almost theatrically, at Silas. "Silas," Preston began, a performative sigh escaping his lips, a clear signal that the ritualistic public shaming was about to commence. "Still dabbling in those digital fantasies? Tell me, have any of those startups of yours managed to break even yet? Or are we still talking about potential? A ripple of suppressed laughter spread through the table. It was a familiar wave, one that Silas had learned to anticipate, to ride, to let wash over him without leaving him drenched in shame. His Aunt Carol, a woman whose entire existence seemed predicated on upholding family reputation and delivering thinly veiled critiques, was always quick to join the chorus. "Oh, Silas, dear," she chirped, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Your mother worries so. A man your age, still chasing rainbows when there's a perfectly stable, respectable career right here in the family business." Her words were punctuated by a sympathetic glance at Silas's mother, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze fixed on her plate. His uncle, Preston's father, a man whose life was a testament to the unyielding power of real assets, nodded sagely. "Indeed, Silas, the world needs structure. It needs real businesses, real assets, not just lines of code floating in the ether." His words were a heavy hammer, meant to crush any lingering illusion of validity Silas might hold for his chosen path. Their words, sharp and designed to wound, landed with the impact of pebbles on a stone. Silas felt nothing but a quiet sense of amusement, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. They believed they were piercing his armor, exposing his perceived weaknesses, but they were merely scratching at a surface he had painstakingly crafted over decades. They saw a man who had failed to live up to their conventional expectations, a dreamer lost in the clouds. They had no idea, not a single clue, and that, he realized, was the most delicious part of it all. The secret he held, the truth that was about to shatter their carefully constructed reality, felt like a powerful, silent hum beneath his skin. He simply nodded, his gaze steady, meeting Preston's smug eyes. "Patience, Preston," he said, his voice calm, almost a murmur, yet carrying a resonance only he understood. "Patience changes everything." Preston chuckled, a dismissive sound, loud enough to draw more attention. He thought Silas was acknowledging defeat, resigning himself to his failure. Oh, how wrong he was. His earliest memories were tinged with the distinct flavor of being an outsider. While Preston excelled in sports, dominating the schoolyard and charming the adults with his precocious wit. Silas found solace in the quiet hum of a nascent computer, dismantling old radios and sketching intricate circuit boards in notebooks. The family home, a stately but somewhat stifling place filled with antique furniture and the lingering scent of old money, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. From an early age, he gravitated towards the logic and predictability of machines, a stark contrast to the shifting, often illogical social dynamics of his family. His parents, traditional and pragmatic, viewed his interests with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Why can't you be more like Preston?" was a constant refrain, whispered behind cupped hands, but loud enough for a child's sensitive ears to internalize. Preston, older by 2 years, quickly learned to weaponize this comparison. He thrived on the spotlight, on being the family's golden child, the inheritor of their tangible legacy, while Silas retreated further into his world of logic and algorithms. He remembered one sweltering summer afternoon, perhaps when he was 10. While Preston was out hitting baseballs, Silas had painstakingly rewired an old VCR into a rudimentary gaming console. He had presented it to his father, expecting a glimmer of pride. Instead, his father had merely frowned, asking, "What good is this, Silas? Can it earn you a living? Can it build something real, like a factory?" The question had stung, not because it was malicious, but because it highlighted the fundamental chasm in their understanding of value. His path diverged sharply from the family's ingrained trajectory. Their world was built on tangible assets, manufacturing, sprawling real estate holdings, the solid, unwavering foundation of the family company, Sterling Industries. It was a company founded by his great-grandfather, expanded by his grandfather, and now steered by his uncles and, increasingly, Preston, who was being groomed for leadership. Sterling Industries wasn't just a business, it was the source of their pride, their livelihood, their identity, the very bedrock of their existence. To them, Silas's fascination with the internet, with software, with anything that couldn't be touched or seen, was akin to chasing phantoms. "A hobby, dear, not a career," his mother would sigh, her voice laced with resignation as he pored over lines of code late into the night, the glow of his monitor illuminating his determined face. He remembered one particularly cold winter evening during a family dinner when he was still in college. He had dared to share his vision for a tech startup, an idea about optimizing supply chains through AI. The very air in the room seemed to stiffen. Preston, already working his way up the ladder at Sterling Industries, burst out laughing, a loud, derisive sound that echoed through the otherwise quiet dining room. "AI? Silas, are you trying to build a robot butler? The real money is in steel and concrete, my friend, not in magic internet beans." The laughter around the table stung, a collective dismissal of his ambitions, a public declaration of his perceived foolishness. His uncle Robert, usually more reserved, had even clapped him on the shoulder, saying, "Plenty of room for a good analyst at Sterling, Silas. Think about it. Stability." That night, something hardened within him. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a cold, calculating resolve. He would not just succeed, he would succeed on his own terms, in his own field, and he would do it so thoroughly that their laughter would eventually choke in their throats. After university, he didn't take the safe, corporate path. He plunged headfirst into the chaotic world of startups. There were years of ramen noodles, of working out of cramped, dimly lit co-working spaces where the air hummed with the desperate energy of fledgling dreams. There were countless rejections from venture capitalists who saw his ideas as too abstract, too ahead of their time, or simply too unproven. His family, of course, saw this as further proof of his failure. Preston would call, ostensibly to check in, but always to deliver a thinly veiled lecture about getting a real job or settling down. He'd brag about his latest promotion at Sterling, the new luxury car he'd bought, the solid pension plan he was building. Each conversation was a subtle jab, a reminder of the chasm between their lives, a constant reinforcement of the narrative they had constructed for him, the struggling dreamer. He never reacted, never defended himself. He merely listened, storing away each condescending word, each boast, each dismissive sigh. They were data points, confirming the depth of their conventional myopia, solidifying his resolve. But while they were focused on the visible, the tangible, Silas was building in the unseen. His secret weapon wasn't a hidden skill, it was a unique perspective and ability to see patterns and opportunities where others saw only chaos. The early rejections had forced him to refine his ideas, to dig deeper, to find problems no one else was addressing. His first real breakthrough came with a niche software solution for predictive logistics, a tool that could optimize global shipping routes with unprecedented accuracy, predicting delays before they happened, rerouting cargo with almost prescient efficiency. It wasn't glamorous, not a flashy consumer app that would make headlines, but it was incredibly effective, saving businesses millions. His company, Nexus Dynamics, grew steadily, quietly, beneath the radar of mainstream media. He deliberately kept a low profile, avoiding flashy headlines or public accolades. This was partly due to his nature. He preferred substance over show, but also a strategic decision. He didn't want to tip his hand. He wasn't interested in superficial recognition. He was building an empire, one line of code, one successful contract at a time. The idea to acquire Sterling Industries, the company his family held so dear, didn't come to him overnight. It was a slow-burn realization, fueled by years of their dismissive attitudes and Preston's relentless condescension. It began as a fleeting thought, a flicker of poetic justice, but it solidified into a concrete plan as he gathered more and more data on Sterling's increasingly vulnerable position. The catalyst, he supposed, was the knowledge that Sterling Industries, despite its veneer of stability, had been struggling quietly for years. Their traditional methods were becoming outdated, their supply chains inefficient, their market share slowly eroding under the relentless pressure of more agile, technologically savvy competitors. Preston, for all his boasting, was blind to these systemic issues, too focused on superficial wins and internal politics within the company. He saw himself as the savior, but he was merely rearranging deck chairs on a slowly sinking ship, convinced that minor cost-cutting and aggressive sales tactics were enough. Silas, with his unique vantage point from Nexus Dynamics, saw the cracks becoming fissures. He saw an opportunity not just for a strategic acquisition to expand Nexus Dynamics' reach into a new sector, but also for a poetic, undeniable vindication. It wasn't about revenge, not truly, for revenge was a hollow emotion that faded. It was about proving a point that no amount of words ever could. It was about showing them the true meaning of real business. And the most powerful way to do that was to own the very thing they defined as success, to turn their symbol of stability into the ultimate testament of his own unconventional triumph. His plan was to acquire it, not just to buy it, but to absorb it, to make it a part of his unseen empire, transforming its antiquated structure with the very digital fantasies they had so scorned. The execution of the plan was a masterclass in quiet, methodical precision. Silas initiated the process nearly 2 years ago, long before this current family reunion was even a blip on the calendar. His team at Nexus Dynamics, accustomed to his unorthodox strategies and his insistence on absolute discretion, worked tirelessly and meticulously. They set up a series of shell companies and investment vehicles across multiple jurisdictions, carefully designed to obscure his direct involvement. The legal and financial labyrinth was complex, a deliberate smokescreen. They started by acquiring small, seemingly insignificant stakes in Sterling Industries through various holding groups, slowly building up a portfolio of shares without triggering any alarms or drawing the attention of the existing board. His financial advisors, initially skeptical of his interest in a legacy manufacturing company when Nexus Dynamics was soaring in the tech sector, soon understood the strategic brilliance once he laid out the full vision for integrating Sterling's physical assets with Nexus Dynamics' advanced digital infrastructure. It was not merely an acquisition. It was a vertical integration, a fusion of old-world industry with new-world efficiency. Preston, meanwhile, was entirely oblivious. He was too busy basking in the glow of his recent promotion to Chief Operations Officer at Sterling, a position he'd leveraged for a substantial new bonus. He was focused on implementing superficial cost-cutting measures that, while saving money in the short term, were further eroding Sterling's long-term competitive edge and alienating key suppliers. He saw himself as a visionary, streamlining operations, but in reality, he was merely patching over gaping wounds with flimsy tape, prioritizing immediate profits over foundational health. He'd often call Silas, sometimes with feigned concern, sometimes with outright pity, to tell him about Sterling's robust financials and how stable a career in traditional industry was. "Silas," he'd say, a condescending lilt in his voice, "it's not too late to learn how a real company operates. I could put in a word for you." Each unsolicited piece of advice, each boast about Sterling's supposed strength, was another brick in the foundation of Silas's resolve, another data point confirming Preston's colossal blind spot. He never suspected that the very real company he championed was slowly, silently, becoming Silas's. The true challenge lay in acquiring the controlling shares without alerting the existing board or, more importantly, the myriad family shareholders. Sterling was still a privately held company, largely controlled by various branches of their extended family, a web of cousins, aunts, and uncles, many of whom held significant yet often dormant shares. It required delicate negotiations, one-on-one meetings, not by Silas himself, but by highly skilled intermediaries. These proxies, seasoned in discreet corporate maneuvers, approached distant cousins and elderly aunts and uncles, making offers that were attractive but not so exorbitant as to raise suspicion. They leveraged the company's recent dip in performance, gently highlighting the risks of a volatile market and the potential for a larger, more stable entity to absorb their shares for a comfortable, immediate return. Many of them, growing old and tired of the constant internal bickering and the stagnant dividends, were surprisingly eager to divest, especially when the offers were presented as coming from a diversified investment fund looking to modernize their portfolio. The anonymity was key. It allowed them to sell without feeling they were betraying the family legacy to a direct competitor or, worse, to someone they knew and perhaps dismissed. Silas remembered one conversation particularly vividly as recounted by his proxy. His uncle Arthur, a distant relative who owned a substantial block of shares, had always been one of his harshest critics, constantly reminding him of his unstable career choices and his lack of a real man's job. When Silas's proxy presented him with the offer, Uncle Arthur had scoffed at the idea of selling to an unknown entity. "Sterling has been in this family for generations," he boomed, his voice echoing the family's deeply ingrained reverence for tradition. The intermediary calmly presented the compelling financial projections, contrasting them with Sterling's stagnant growth and the increasingly competitive market. He talked about new vision and global reach, carefully crafted phrases that resonated with Uncle Arthur's underlying desire for financial security. Uncle Arthur, swayed by the promise of a substantial, immediate payout and the allure of a clean break from the managerial headaches, eventually signed. Silas was not there in person, but his proxy reported his parting words. "Well, at least someone sensible is buying it. Not like some of these young dreamers with their heads in the clouds." A wry smile touched Silas's lips when he heard that. The irony was palpable, a testament to the effectiveness of his silent operation. Weeks turned into months. The acquisitions became more aggressive, culminating in the final offer to the remaining key shareholders, a strategic move designed to be presented as an unsolicited, irresistible buyout from an unknown, powerful consortium. This was the most delicate phase, requiring impeccable timing and an unyielding poker face. The board, including Preston and Silas's uncles, initially resisted, clinging to the illusion of control and the emotional attachment to the family name. But the consortium's undeniable financial muscle and the detailed, compelling future plans for Sterling, presented by a team of external consultants Silas had hired, were undeniable. These consultants, unaware of Silas's direct involvement, spoke of modernizing infrastructure, investing in AI-driven efficiencies, a phrase that must have made Preston wince given his past mockery of AI, and expanding into new, lucrative markets. They didn't know these were all strategies Silas had already implemented and proven within Nexus Dynamics. The family, still believing Sterling was their unshakable pillar, were slowly being encircled, their world shrinking while Silas's was expanding to encompass theirs. During this period, Silas continued to attend family gatherings, enduring the usual jibes with a serene calm that must have maddened Preston. Preston saw Silas's silence as resignation, his quiet demeanor as a sign of defeat. He saw Silas as the same failure he had always been, the one who couldn't quite measure up. "Still running that little website, Silas?" he'd sneer, pouring himself another glass of expensive whiskey. purchased, no doubt, with his Sterling Industries salary. You know, the stock market is doing quite well these days. Maybe diversify out of those, digital assets. Silas would simply nod, sometimes offering a vague, non-committal reply. He allowed Preston's arrogance to swell, his confidence to blind him. The deeper his conviction in his own superiority, the greater the fall would be. Silas was not merely waiting. He was watching, observing the patterns of their hubris, meticulously preparing the stage for the moment when their entire world would shift beneath their feet. Every patronizing glance, every dismissive comment, every boast from Preston was meticulously filed away, not as resentment, but as data points, confirming the precise moment and manner in which Silas would deliver the truth. His patience was not a weakness. It was the ultimate strategic advantage, a calculated weapon forged in years of quiet determination. The crescendo of the annual reunion came, as it always did, with the dessert. His aunt had baked her infamous apple pie, its sweet scent filling the grand living room, and the entire family, bloated with turkey and self-satisfaction, was gathered around, coffee cups in hand. The conversation, predictably, turned to careers, investments, and the latest challenges at Sterling Industries, which Preston, of course, expertly framed as opportunities he was uniquely qualified to conquer. He recounted a recent, minor deal he'd closed, embellishing the details to make himself sound like a corporate titan. "And how about you, Silas?" His Uncle Robert chimed in, a twinkle of genuine, if misguided, concern in his eyes. "Heard anything back on that loan application for your cloud computing venture?" The room went silent, a collective intake of breath. The loan application was a well-known family joke, a mischaracterization of an early funding round Silas had pursued years ago, which had ultimately failed, becoming another arrow in the family's quiver of his perceived shortcomings. Preston seized the moment, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Oh, Uncle Robert, you know Silas. Always chasing the next big thing that never quite materializes. He's a dreamer, bless his heart, but someone needs to keep the lights on here at Sterling, right?" He chuckled, a loud, self-satisfied sound, and a few family members joined in, some out of genuine amusement, others out of uncomfortable obligation, their eyes darting to Silas, expecting his usual quiet retreat. His mother, bless her heart, looked down at her lap, a familiar flush of embarrassment rising on her cheeks, caught between her son's perceived failure and the family's judgment. His father cleared his throat, about to launch into his usual defense of following your passion, which always sounded more like an apology than an endorsement. But before anyone else could speak, Silas slowly, deliberately placed his coffee cup on the antique mahogany table. The gentle clink resonated in the sudden, expectant silence. All eyes turned to him, some curious, some still smirking, some simply waiting for him to shrink into himself. He felt a profound sense of calm, a stillness at the very core of his being. This was it. The culmination of years of quiet work, of enduring their judgment, of building in the shadows, of transforming scorn into steel. "Actually, Preston," he began, his voice soft, yet carrying an unexpected weight, cutting through the lingering tension. "He is quite familiar with how the lights are kept on at Sterling these days." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing their full, understated power to sink in. Preston's smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of irritation, then confusion. He probably thought Silas was about to launch into one of his tech explanations, boring everyone with jargon they neither understood nor cared for. "What's that supposed to mean, Silas?" Preston retorted, a slight edge in his voice, a hint of defensive aggression creeping in. Silas reached into the inner pocket of his simple, tailored jacket, a jacket that, like him, bespoke quiet quality rather than flashy ostentation, and slowly, deliberately, pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't flashy, just a standard corporate letterhead, crisp and official, but the logo at the top was unmistakable. Sterling Industries. And below it, a clear, concise statement, starkly printed. "It means," Silas continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, landing finally on Preston's, holding it firm, "that as of precisely 9 a.m. this morning, through Nexus Dynamics, He completed the acquisition of all outstanding shares, making Sterling Industries a wholly owned subsidiary of his company. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just a lull in conversation. It was a complete cessation of all sound, as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only a vacuum of disbelief. His mother gasped, a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. His father's jaw dropped, his eyes wide with disbelief, the protective stance he was about to take for Silas frozen mid-movement. Aunt Carol's hand, halfway to her mouth with a piece of pie, froze mid-air, a shard of apple threatening to fall. Preston, however, was a study in pure, unadulterated shock. His face drained of color, leaving a sickly pallor that seemed to defy the warmth of the room. His eyes, usually so arrogant and self-assured, darted frantically between Silas's calm face and the document in his hand, searching for a trick, a punchline. That's impossible, he stammered, his voice cracking, the booming baritone reduced to a pathetic squeak, the sound of a deflating balloon. You're lying. Nexus Dynamics? What even is Nexus Dynamics? Some internet scam? Silas slowly unfolded the document, holding it up for all to see. It was the official press release, embargoed until that morning, announcing the full acquisition. Nexus Dynamics, he explained, his voice still measured, utterly devoid of triumph, merely stating facts, is the technology company he founded, the one consistently referred to as his digital fantasy and internet scam. It specializes in AI-driven logistics and supply chain optimization. The same technologies, ironically, that Sterling Industries has been so desperately lacking and, as a result, has been quietly bleeding market share for the last 5 years, falling behind its more agile competitors. The room erupted. Not in shouts, but in a cacophony of stunned murmurs, gasps, and bewildered questions. Acquisition? What acquisition? Sterling is sold? To Silas? It was a symphony of disbelief, a collective awakening to a reality they had completely missed. Preston sprang to his feet, knocking over his coffee cup, the ceramic clattering loudly against the mahogany table. This is a joke, Silas. You think you can just waltz in here and claim you own the company his family built? His company? He's COO. He would know. His voice was rising, a desperate, frantic edge to it. Silas met his frantic gaze, unflinching. You were the chief operations officer, Preston. Your contract, along with the rest of the existing executive board, was terminated effectively at 9 a.m. this morning. The official notice was sent to your corporate email minutes ago, and an interim management team from Nexus Dynamics is already on site, securing assets and beginning the transition process, ensuring a smooth handover. He paused, allowing the full weight of his words to settle, to crush Preston's last vestiges of denial. The diversified investment fund that recently acquired controlling interest in Sterling and then made the final buyout offer to the remaining shareholders? That was Nexus Dynamics, Preston. That was him. Stealth acquisitions are a specialty of theirs. Preston's face twisted from disbelief to horror, then to a profound, visceral rage. He looked like a man who had just seen his entire world crumble before his eyes, because he had. He lunged forward, his hand reaching for the document, as if he could snatch away the truth. But his father, surprisingly quick and protective, stepped in front of him, blocking his path, his own shock momentarily forgotten in the face of his son's raw fury. Silas, his father said, his voice a bewildered whisper, his eyes searching Silas's face for confirmation. Is this true? Silas simply nodded, his gaze firm, conveying an unshakable certainty. Every word. He has a press conference scheduled for this afternoon to announce the details. He thought the family deserved to hear it directly from him. First, before the news broke publicly, he folded the document back, slipping it into his pocket. The air in the room was thick with unspoken accusations, with the bitter taste of their past words hanging heavy. They had called him a failure, mocked his ambitions, dismissed his entire existence outside their narrow definition of success. And now, the very symbol of their pride, The company they believed made them untouchable was unequivocally, undeniably his. The silence that followed was no longer one of mere shock, but of profound, crushing realization, the sound of a world shifting on its axis. The immediate aftermath of the reveal was a chaotic whirlwind. The family reunion, meticulously planned and usually extending well into the evening, dissolved into a maelstrom of accusations, panicked phone calls, and desperate attempts at damage control. His mother, after the initial shock, was torn between an overwhelming, almost bewildered pride in her son's monumental achievement and a deep-seated unease, her ingrained habit of worrying about his stability clashing violently with the undeniable reality of his success. She kept glancing at him, a mixture of awe and trepidation in her eyes. His father, surprisingly, was the first to approach him, his hand resting tentatively on Silas's shoulder, a look of profound respect mixed with bewilderment in his eyes. "Silas," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He had no idea. They had no idea. His voice was filled with a regret so palpable it almost felt like a whispered apology, a quiet acknowledgement of decades of misunderstanding. Preston, however, was a different story entirely. He didn't just collapse, he imploded. After Silas's announcement, he had stormed out of the living room, making frantic calls on his phone, his face a mask of disbelief and raw fury. He couldn't comprehend how a company he had dismissed as a digital fantasy could have quietly, systematically, acquired the very foundation of his perceived power and identity. By the time the news broke publicly a few hours later, confirmed by financial news outlets, Preston's professional world began to unravel with alarming speed. His executive termination was widely reported, a humiliating public spectacle, and the stock market, reacting to the news of a complete change in ownership and a radical shift in strategy for Sterling, saw a predictable dip. His carefully cultivated image as a shrewd, indispensable businessman was shattered, replaced by headlines questioning his competence and his awareness of his own company's vulnerabilities. Silas heard snippets of Preston's increasingly desperate phone conversations from other family members, who, in their own panic, couldn't resist gossiping. Preston tried to rally support from various board members, from his uncles who held shares, but it was too late. Silas had already secured the majority. Preston's arguments were based on loyalty and tradition, while Silas's acquisition was based on market value and strategic foresight. The family, particularly those who relied on Sterling Industries for their livelihoods, was in a state of shock and a growing sense of panic, the ground shifting beneath their feet. His Aunt Carol, whose husband held a mid-level management position at Sterling, approached Silas later that day, her usual haughty demeanor replaced by a pleading desperation. "Silas, what about them? What about John's job? He's been with Sterling for 30 years. Silas simply assured her that a full assessment of all employees would be conducted, with a focus on retaining talent that aligned with the new vision. His tone was neutral, professional, devoid of any schadenfreude. He wasn't there to destroy, he was there to restructure, to build, to modernize. The wider family's reaction was a complex mix of awe, shock, and a palpable sense of shame. They started recalling past comments, past slights, replaying them in their minds, now seen through the searing lens of Silas's undeniable triumph. The dreamer, the failure, the one always needing a real job, was now the owner of the very company that had been their family's pride and, for many, their primary source of income and social standing. Cousins who had always treated him with polite disdain now approached him with a newfound respect, tinged with awkwardness, their usual condescension replaced by hesitant inquiries. The shift in dynamics was immediate and absolute, a complete reversal of the established pecking order. Some offered hesitant congratulations, others muttered apologies, and a few simply avoided his gaze, unable to reconcile the image of the failed Silas with the reality of the formidable entrepreneur who had just orchestrated one of the most significant and secretive acquisitions in their family's history. Silas maintained his composure throughout it all. There was no need for grand pronouncements or triumphant gestures. The truth, in its stark simplicity, was powerful enough, speaking volumes louder than any words could. He wasn't interested in rubbing their faces in their past mistakes. His goal had never been purely punitive. It was about proving a point, yes, but more importantly, it was about validating his own path, his own vision, and showing that true success isn't always found on the well-trodden, conventional path. Preston, stripped of his title and his carefully constructed facade of competence, found himself adrift. The company he had claimed to protect, and from which he derived his sense of worth, was now under the control of the person he had relentlessly mocked. The irony was not lost on Silas, nor, he suspected, on Preston, whose downfall was not something Silas actively orchestrated beyond the acquisition itself. It was a natural, inevitable consequence of his own arrogance and his blindness to the quiet, strategic power of the path he had so readily dismissed. 6 months have passed since that memorable reunion, that seismic shift in their family's landscape. The dust has settled, but the echoes of that day still reverberate, a permanent marker in their collective history. Silas's life, once defined by the whispers of failure and potential, is now characterized by a quiet, profound sense of purpose and vindication. Nexus Dynamics has fully integrated Sterling Industries. They've rebranded it, not as a replacement, but as Sterling Innovations, a testament to its long legacy, now infused with new life and cutting-edge technology. The old, inefficient processes that Preston had so proudly streamlined have been replaced by AI-driven systems, vastly improving efficiency and opening up new market opportunities in areas Sterling had never even considered. The company is thriving, experiencing growth it hasn't seen in decades, a testament to the power of vision meeting execution. Silas sits in the new, modernized headquarters of Sterling Innovations, a building that still bears the original, grand facade, a respectful nod to its past, but now hums with the quiet energy of innovation within. His office, overlooking the bustling city, is minimalist, functional, reflecting his own preference for substance over superficiality. He often thinks about that reunion, about Preston's smug face, about the family's dismissive laughter. The memory now feels distant, almost detached, like a scene from a movie he once watched, a historical anecdote rather than a fresh wound. There's no bitterness, no lingering resentment, just a quiet satisfaction, a profound sense of peace that comes from a battle fought and won, not with aggression, but with quiet competence. Preston, he hears, is struggling. He attempted to start his own consulting firm, leveraging his experience at Sterling, but his reputation for arrogance and a lack of real strategic depth preceded him, making it difficult to secure clients. He's no longer the golden boy, no longer the family's pride, no longer the one whose stories dominated gatherings. The last he heard, Preston was looking for a corporate job, any corporate job, a far cry from the executive suites he once inhabited with such arrogant confidence. His downfall wasn't Silas's intent but a byproduct of Preston's own hubris. He believed that power and respect were inherent to a title or a legacy. He never understood that they must be earned through vision, hard work, and genuine competence. The family dynamic has irrevocably changed. His parents, once consumed by worry, now beam with an almost bewildered pride, still adjusting to the sheer scale of his achievement. They no longer ask about his digital fantasies, they ask for his insights on market trends, for his advice on their own investments. Cousins who once offered pity now seek advice or cautiously inquire about job opportunities within Sterling Innovations, their past disdain replaced by a hesitant deference. The judgmental glares have been replaced by respectful nods, by genuine curiosity. They've seen firsthand that success isn't always loud or conventional. It can be built in silence with meticulous planning while others are too busy making noise, blinded by their own preconceptions. Silas has learned that true vindication isn't found in gloating over another's downfall but in the quiet, undeniable evidence of one's own growth and triumph. It's not about proving others wrong, but about proving oneself right on one's own terms, following an internal compass rather than external expectations. The most profound revenge is living a life that transcends the limitations others have placed upon you, achieving a greatness they could never have imagined. So, to anyone feeling underestimated, dismissed, or labeled a dreamer in a world that values only the tangible, cultivate your quiet strength. Understand that while others are busy judging your present, you can be meticulously building your future. The loudest statements are often made in the most unexpected silence, and true success is not measured by the applause of others, but by the unwavering belief in your own vision, even when no one else can see it. If you enjoyed this story of quiet triumph and unexpected vindication, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss similar narratives exploring resilience and success. Have you ever been underestimated or had your dreams dismissed? How did you respond? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Silas would be interested to hear them.